Okay, well, we might as well get started. Thank you for zooming in today with us on behalf of the Sandbox Center. Welcome to our Experts in Residence session, Digital Marketing and E-Commerce, featuring today's expert, Larche Agency. For those who haven't been acquainted with me or the Sandbox, my name's Mackenzie. I'm one of the 6 members of the team. We're located downtown Barrie and online to connect people and their ideas to business resources so that they can create a better life through business. Sandbox is proud to acknowledge that we're positioned on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people, which include the Odawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi nations, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy. We also acknowledge the Wendat Nation, Huron, who occupied these lands prior to the middle of the 17th century. We're committed to educating ourselves and our community on the importance of honoring the first occupancy of this land while supporting with the actionable steps towards reconciliation. If you haven't attended one of our EIR sessions before, we're so happy to have you with us today. And for those returning, welcome back. Across a wide variety of topics and expertise, our EIR program provides a free all-access opportunity for you to share and receive expert feedback in order to support your business moving forward with greater clarity. Now, we know the digital landscape is changing as we approach a cookieless future. In the last year alone, digital marketing practices and trends have accelerated tremendously, and in some cases, making it somewhat fearful for some business to even attempt to hop on the train and really reap the true rewards and outcomes that are actually attainable. So today we're super excited to have Jessie Larche, Managing Director of Larche Agency, here to provide some insight on how you can start winning at digital advertising in 2021 and beyond. With a graduate background in marketing and advertising and over 10 years working within the industry, Jessie gained practical experience by leading business development for traditional and digital marketing products at Larche before transitioning to the role of Managing Director in 2016. Now, as one of the company's leaders, Jessie's foremost goal is to exemplify Larche's mission, to partner with clients to develop strategic, innovative marketing solutions that get results. Before we dig right in, we'd like to thank our community partners, as always, with the sharing of our events, and a massive thank you to our sponsor, Larche, for delivering today's session. We're so grateful to have your expertise behind us and to support our business community. If you have any questions that pop across your mind during this session, please, we encourage you to use the Q&A feature that's at the bottom of your screen or the chat. We'll be sure to answer them towards the end of the session. And without further ado, let's get into the goods. Welcome, Jessie. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. And certainly thank you for having myself and Larche back to these sessions. We love participating both as a presenter and joining. We've had lots of great opportunities. So thank you, thank you. I'm going to dig right into it. And like Mackenzie mentioned, happy to answer any questions closer to the end of the presentation. I'm going to try and leave a good buffer of time and perhaps give you some time back. I'm looking over, like I mentioned at the top of the call, if my dog starts barking, I may have to run away. Okay, so just a quick introduction. Like Mackenzie mentioned, the advertising landscape is changing, and this is very much the hot topic of conversations. If you're in marketing circles, you've likely already been exposed to this. But in a nutshell, we're approaching this cookieless future. Not a bad thing, but essentially we're moving towards a privacy-first web. And what that means is pretty significant implications with digital advertising and marketing strategies in general. There she is. I'm so sorry. So what this presentation will focus on is providing an overview of the impact of these changes, why owned data or first-party data is going to be of most importance, personalization in your marketing, and why excellent creative is going to be the foremost priority when you're building out your new marketing strategies. So what's changing and why it matters? This is a very technical and frankly complicated subject matter. So I'm really going to scratch the surface. However, I'm quite happy to dig into more detailed questions. But broadly, we're going to go over identifier for advertisers, or IDFA. That is an Apple or iOS identifier, and Google moving towards eliminating third-party cookies. So identity for advertisers, very jargony. What even does that mean? So the IDFA, or Identity for Advertisers, assigns a unique number to Apple devices. So if you're familiar with cookies, that's that footprint that's left at the browser level. And IDFA acts very similar, but it's leaving it on the actual device. And what it does is provide two categories of insight. The first is the actual actions a user takes in an app or on a website on these devices. And it also captures the interactions that these users display with digital ads. So together, this twofold analysis produces really robust analytics and insight. And ultimately, it allows marketers like myself and brand owners to measure performance and understand attribution. So we talk a lot about attribution, and that is actually fundamentally changing as we move towards a privacy-first web, but in a really cool way. So what's happening with IDFA? In a nutshell, in the summer of 2020, I believe it was July 2020, so we're just approaching this year, Apple announced privacy changes to the new software, their newest software update. So if you're an Apple user like I am, you've almost certainly been exposed to what this change means. So the IDFA is not going anywhere. However, what they are implementing is requesting explicit consent from their users to allow tracking. And you can see the language is actually quite aggressive, for lack of a better term, in that it's saying, can this app actually track you across apps and websites? And not surprisingly, a Flurry report, a leader in the industry, as recently as May 2021, this change is already in effect, has shown that just 4% of users are opting for allowing to be tracked. So not surprising at all. This is absolutely what we suspected. But essentially what it means is that for individuals who have these active campaigns and or learnings through app and mobile websites are now losing a significant amount of data, which of course impacts their campaigns and their active marketing strategies. Prior to this update, this information was shared by default. There was no request. Individuals with this analytical access had it, and we had it at our fingertips, essentially. So that was Apple's side. Now we're going to look at Google and these cookies that I'm sure you've heard about, but we'll dig into what that actually means in a bit more detail. So this is me trying to be clever, I suppose, but the cookies are crumbling. So Google is removing third-party cookies. Unlike Apple, they've given a bit more time for marketers and brands to acclimate and plan accordingly, and even test some new solutions that they're going to be implementing that I'll get into in a bit more detail. But in summary, in early 2020, January 2020, Google announced that Chrome has 2/3 of the market share of browser usage. So very much the leader in its industry, would be phasing out third-party cookies over a 2-year period. So this is actually coming up quite quickly at the time of this presentation. That's going to be in 2022. Just a quick Coles Notes on what browser cookies are. It's essentially a snippet of code that a website puts on a user's browser so that it can measure interactions it's taken on a site and behavior. And this is not just for the site owner, but also across sites. And what it does is over time builds a really comprehensive profile of that user and that user's behaviors and interests. And that's a lot of what is used for targeting online across publisher platforms, but certainly with Google. So once the foundation of targeting users through search and display specifically. However, because understandably consumers are growing both aware and concerned about their privacy, we've seen this big uptick in the use of ad blockers. So though this change is impactful, it was certainly inevitable, and in fact, no longer becoming as useful because consumers are becoming aware, which is great, and they're making changes to protect their privacy. So we're going to dig into this in slightly more detail towards the end of the presentation, and I really want to do my best not to get too much into the nitty-gritty of some of this more technical side. However, Google's going to replace the use of third-party cookies with what it's termed the privacy sandbox. And I'm going to read their definition verbatim because it says it's best. The privacy sandbox, another sandbox, builds measurement natively into the Chrome browser in order to provide user anonymity. Google is confident that it can sustain a healthy ad-supported web in a way that will render third-party cookies obsolete. So we're taking this as fact from Google, and we certainly know that there are lots of other alternatives that can be implemented. But the privacy sandbox and its technologies, again, I'm going to get into that in a bit more detail, are just in the early phases of testing. In fact, in certain parts of Europe, because of GDPR, which is their compliance around privacy and user data, have not been able to test it as of yet. So without knowing really how this is going to work, and admittedly, perhaps it bringing up another wave of privacy concerns, what do we do as brand owners? I certainly market our agency and marketers when this playbook that we relied on for years for acquiring customers and filling the funnel, very bottom of funnel strategies, no longer work. So let's get into that so I don't leave you hanging. So we are shifting from third party to first party, which I think is really cool and exciting. So in this section of the presentation, we're going to discuss owned data collection, which is first party, and personalization, and why personalization in your marketing strategy is not lost, and actually will become the most important tactic that you're going to implement in your overall marketing ecosystem. So this is a really apt quote. The internet is being reshaped to enhance people's control over their data. We recently attended AdWorld, wonderful conference. It's a marketing conference across the globe, as the title suggests. And this was just the topic of conversation. So I pulled this from the wonderful Jan Roos. So shifting from third party to first party, I appreciate that I'm getting rather technical, but the reality is whether you're currently advertising or you plan to advertise in the future, Apple and Google's changes are just the beginning. We are certain other providers are going to follow. And the reality is we need to adapt our marketing strategies, specifically our digital marketing strategies, with user privacy at heart. So just a few points to go over before I jump into things. Increasing privacy for consumers, for us, is a good thing. I'm excited about it. I'm sure you are too, and we need to embrace it. First party cookies are not being phased out. I'm going to get into that in a bit more detail. However, without third party cookies and some of that broader data, the onus now shifts to us, brand owners and brand marketers, to build our own collection systems for data and really interact with consumers at a very granular level. So what is a first-party cookie? First-party cookies are used to understand the behaviors and actions of visitors on your website. Whereas compared to third-party cookies, it's across websites. First-party cookie is specific to the actions that users are taking and behaviors on your site. So you own that data. So that could be the contents of their shopping basket if you are a direct-to-consumer e-commerce brand. It could be downloading a white paper or articles read, form submissions. Really, the list goes on and on, but it's any action that a user takes on your site. This data can be utilized for personalization, which I apologize, I think I've said that 100 times, but we'll get into it in more detail. For the website content on your site, as well as targeted messaging through paid advertising. So through use of first-party data, brands will continue to see and understand 100% of what users are doing on their site and browsing their site, and in some instances, how they're finding that information. So never before, if there's one takeaway, never before has first-party cookies and first-party data been more important. This is going to be the basis of your digital marketing strategy going forward. So what does this all mean? How do we actually get first-party data collection? The reality is you need to implement mechanisms when it comes to your website and your other owned platforms, so Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, so on and so forth, You need to implement systems to be able to acquire this data and also unify it so that you can measure it holistically and cohesively. So first and foremost, if you haven't already, I suspect the majority of you have, connect your website to Google Analytics. It is free. It is going to become your best friend. We're in it every day. They recently updated the interface. It's a bit more palatable and user-friendly, and they're going to be releasing Google Analytics 4, not a super exciting name, which is going to give even more comprehensive analytics. If you already have analytics, or if you don't, the next step you want to take is layering your Google Analytics with a Google Tag Manager account. I'm not going to get into too many details about these respective platforms because they warrant conversations unto themselves. But in a nutshell, Google Tag Manager consolidates all of your tag management efforts across all platforms. So that could be Facebook pixels and Instagram pixels. It could be on-site conversion events, whatever conversion is for you. It could be a phone call, a form, a purchase, and of course more. And basically what Tag Manager does is really provide efficiency and ease to that process. And it acts as a conduit. I'm a very visual learner, so I use my hands a lot. It acts as a conduit from all of these platforms you're active on online through to your Google Analytics. So once it's set up, you simply have to go into your analytics and you have this information. Beyond that, with these tools set up, you can build remarketing pools. So remarketing is not going away when it comes to first-party data. So if someone puts something in their cart, but they abandon it, you can still remarket to them with a really relevant and high-quality ad specific to that product. And just a few more recommendations when it comes to your data collection systems. So we've talked a lot about these platforms where you can observe behavior, which is great, but really the best data collection is actually engaging your customers and talking to your visitors. And this can be done quite easily with a lot of tools at our fingertips that are quite cost effective, frankly, now. And that could be integrating a CRM and email marketing tools like HubSpot and MailChimp. So you'll see a lot more now requesting registration, not to enter the site, but email registration for a newsletter, and then surveying users as they progress and engage more with your site. So you don't want to go too far, too fast. That's not how you build trust with a customer, but you can implement something like progressive profiling, where perhaps it's starting with asking for a name and an email to be part of an email marketing list, but then you can ask for a little bit more. So if you have gated content like a webinar or a white paper, then you can ask for a few more details. And certainly if you want to get in touch with someone on your team, then we can get really granular. So this is called progressive profiling, and it builds trust with your website users and hopefully to-be customers over time. Above all else, so we've talked about the systems for collecting first-party data, and I breezed through it, so hopefully we have time if anyone has any questions. But the absolute first move, certainly before you implement these systems, is ensuring your website is compliant. This is going to be of vital importance, certainly by 2022. So get ahead of the curve and make sure your systems are in place now. You will begin to see similar pop-ups to what I have at the bottom of this screen. This website uses cookies. There are ways to audit your site quite easily to understand if you're currently compliant, and if you're not, what measures you have to take to really reach that milestone. I've included this link. If you're able to copy and paste it, it's cookiebot.com. You simply put in your URL, it will give you results. And there are lots of tools out there that will facilitate cookie compliance and privacy compliance more generally. So this is just one, but absolutely this needs to be done. If you don't do it, not only are you impeding building this confidence with your website users, but you're putting your brand at risk, and you could be subject to some penalties via Google and other search engines. Just going to check the chat. Oh, perfect. Thank you. Okay. So great. We are compliant, assuming we go through that. We know the systems to collect all this really wonderful data. But really, what do you do once you have all of this data? It can very easily be overwhelming unless you're very analytical and astute when it comes to digital metrics. But basically what you want to do once you have this data is develop audience segments. So you want to develop groups of customers based on shared interactions and patterns, if you will. So for example, it could be, sorry about the dog, if you can hear that. It could be users that have visited products on your site. You could group by purchase frequency, the ones who have purchased the most, similar shopping patterns or habits rather. So I've included mothers shopping for children, but the list goes on. And ultimately you group them in the context of your business and your industry, whatever makes sense. But by doing this and understanding their journeys, you now create what we call micro segments. And this forms personalization, our magic word of the presentation, I suppose. So what is personalization that I continue to bring up? It is an umbrella term, a catch-all term for the practice of tailoring your marketing messages and your offers to individuals at a very individual level based on their behavior. So you're being agile and reactive to the indications that users are providing on your site. And what personalization does and why it works so well is it essentially cuts through the noise of mass marketing and mass messages and gets directly to the user at a very relevant and resonant way. So personalization is possible through all digital channels, be it website, social, search. And you do this, again, with our wonderful first-party cookies, our owned data. I'm just going to call out these two pretty significant stats, in my opinion, from a very recent study by Twilio Segment. One insight is that if a brand fails to offer a personalized experience, 44% of consumers say they're likely to take their business elsewhere. And then on a similar note, really expanding on that sentiment, 60% of consumers are likely to become a repeat buyer after a personalized experience. So it's about building this trust, connecting, and then you're building loyalty and creating that special experience, if you will. Important to note, personalization isn't just about speaking to your consumers and sending them this message. Just as important is listening and then responding accordingly. This may sound really overwhelming, and you're probably saying, you know, Jess, I don't have time to sit there and speak to every consumer individually and then respond to them. I wear 10 hats. I totally get it. I don't have that capacity as well. So there are lots of ways where you can automate this process and add a lot of efficiencies through dynamic trigger events. So you develop a library of trigger events and messages. Can you guys see that? I'm so sorry. That's brutal. So by developing a library of trigger events and messages, including different combinations of image and copy and offer, that can then be dynamically matched to a signal. So I'm going to go back to our abandoned cart example. If someone abandons a cart, they're really warmly, but they ultimately didn't go through with purchase, that is a trigger, and you can follow up with a message of, hey, do you want to come back? We'll give you 10% off. Or here's a related product. How can we get this sale closed? Additionally, I have an example from Nike, which I think is really well done. Someone was obviously interacting with this product, didn't purchase. That then went into a trigger event, and when it became on sale, they made sure to notify that user. So in summary, personalization increases engagement and customer loyalty by delivering messages that are tuned and even anticipate what customers really want. And again, it's all built on a foundation of first-party data with privacy at heart. So attracting new customers. We've chatted about what to do when you have customers on your site and how we build these systems and ensure we're compliant and then responding to them. But the million-dollar question is great, but it's not build it and they will come. We need to attract new customers with marketing. So we're going to go over a couple areas of review. One is flock. So what the flock? That's going back to our friends at Google and their privacy sandbox. And then we're going to talk about why creative is the new cookie. And we're going back to our roots with creative being such an integral component of our marketing strategy. So Flock, I really debated including this or not because it is rather technical. However, if you are boosting a Facebook ad or you have a search ad, this should be important to you. So I'm going to scratch the surface. And if you are keen to learn more, which I certainly recommend, though I'm a bit of a geek about this, Google has published a lot of really great articles about Flock and Fledge, which we're not going to get into, but are both relevant. So what is Flock? Flock is the newest technology introduced by the Privacy Sandbox, and it stands for the Federated Learning of Cohorts, which for some reason kind of makes me giggle. It's very formal. But essentially, here's what Flock means, the Coles Notes or Reader's Digest, if you will. So Flock is based on cohorts as opposed to users, and cohorts are the future. I have figure here, that's fun. Future of digital advertising, that's a typo. Cohorts, so groups, are the privacy safe alternative as compared to targeting an individual user. What cohorts do is target groups of users based on shared interests and browsing. So not necessarily user behavior and that tracking from site to site and app to app. It's really about joining a group of individuals who have overlap in their interest in browsing. Advertisers, so us and publishers, can contribute to cohorts with first-party data. So building out the size of those cohorts and making the relevance that much more accurate. And Google claims, I shouldn't say claims, I certainly believe them, it's achieved 95% as many conversions with cohort targeting compared to cookies. So the theory is that with cohorts compared to user targeting, that our strategies should be as successful, but we're doing it with the user privacy first, which is really, really cool. So I'm going to move on from Flock, but again, if we want to chat more either during this session or in a one-on-one, you're welcome to reach out and we can kind of geek out together about it. But what this all means, first-party data, we no longer can get this really granular user-level data, which was a little bit creepy to users and I'm sure us anyway. Now we need to go back to our roots as brands and as marketers, and creative is going to be the new cookie. It's going to really shine in this new strategy. Really quickly, so we talked about Flock and cohort targeting being the future of digital advertising. Another really important takeaway is contextual targeting. And the best way to think of contextual targeting is showing ads to users based on the contents of their screen. So I took this example from cars.com. It's obviously for car enthusiasts. They're very studied when it comes to this. So you see a Chevrolet ad, or maybe it's an ad for brakes. I am not a car enthusiast, so perhaps I should have chosen a different example. But we actually expect that this is going to perform better than showing ads that are based on the user and not necessarily relevant to the content that they're consuming at any given time on the web. And we're excited to put that into play, but the reality is without third-party cookies and that user tracking, contextual targeting and keyword targeting are going to become at the forefront of targeting, which is what it was 10 years ago, and now it's back, which is kind of neat. And just back to creative. So we're really going to have to focus on more top of funnel strategies. So what this cross-site tracking did was hyper-focus, in fact, on following a user around on the web and trying to understand who they are. And it meant we got lazy with creative. It was very bottom of funnel, and it was based on all of this data. Now we can take a step back and really focus on the quality of our creative and standing out from that noise, as I said, with really excellent, but also relevant creative. So I've turned this L'Oreal example. This is actually from Germany, if you want a bit of context. And it came out of a study where they found that it was something ridiculous, like 95% of leadership roles were by men. So I thought this was really great. And I'm a woman in leadership, so here we are. So in summary, I can't believe we made it through this with Zoe, my crazy video participant. In summary, we are forging ahead, and it's about building real relationships with our customers or our users, and hopefully will be customers. And the key takeaways is that our advertising strategies need to be more relevant. We're going to focus on contextual targeting and keyword targeting. We need to really focus on our creative, and if it hasn't been already, put some time and investment towards the quality of that creative and the messaging. And then we need to marry all of these mechanisms with data collection, with personalization and those systems. I strongly believe that with this modern approach and kind of abandoning this user level targeting, that we're actually going to enjoy higher rates of return based on greater customer confidence and trust, and knowing that their privacy is first and foremost. And that's it. That's the whole presentation. So thank you for bearing with that. And I so apologize for Zoe. I was hoping she would nap right now.
Don't apologize. We love Zoe. She is the star of the show. She's amazing. Thanks so much, Jessie. That presentation was incredible. I mean, every time you come, you bring such great insights and deliver it in a way that is so digestible. So we super appreciate it. We do have some questions in the chat here. So if you don't mind, if we dig into some. To start us off, actually, I had a question as it relates to Flock and the cohorts for targeting that Google has introduced. Have you, because they have seen now, like they have 95% achieved, or you should have 95% achieved, have you seen or heard of like the similar success now that they've implemented with any of your clients or around in the agency ecosystem, et cetera?
Yeah, so the short answer is no. The reason being is that Flock is still in the testing phase. So what Google does through Privacy Sandbox is, I didn't even think of the overlap sandbox.
I love it.
Right? They are introducing these proposals. So Flock was a proposal, Fledge, which I didn't really get into, but I recommend reading up on that if there's interest. These are proposals and they're in the testing phases right now. So they will allow publishers and advertisers to test. We don't have that yet. We won't be implementing Flock technology until 2022. So what Google did, which everyone really appreciates, quite frankly, is give this lead time of what will be 2 years and testing, which is really, really cool. So they've been very transparent about how they're shifting. And whoops, sorry, my screen just went there.
That's all good.
About how they're shifting this process. So we haven't actually implemented it yet. We hope to test it soon. From all accounts, it seems very promising.
Cool, awesome. First question here, somebody's asking, with countless metrics from various analytics tools for digital tracking, what would be your recommended criteria for deciding which metrics are worth our attention?
That is a really cool question. And in typical fashion, I have a frustrating answer. So the way, I think the best way for me to describe this is to just walk you through what we would do with a client. So when we go through that consultation and planning, we decide on what those metrics are going to be based on their business and their objectives and any KPIs they might have. So I can say with advertising, whether you're B2B or you're D2C, direct to consumer, we usually talk about cost per acquisition above all else. So it's really easy to look at, a really low CPM, cost per 1,000 people reached, or a really low CPC. But the reality is, if you implement a poorly structured campaign, you can get these really low metrics and it appears great. But the reality is you're putting your advertising in front of unqualified eyes. Mm-hmm. So we always start with cost per acquisition. What are you willing to pay with your ad dollars for a new client? Buff in a margin, et cetera. And then we reverse engineer that. So once we can be really aggressive with a low CPA, we will then understand what a healthy CPC and a healthy CPM would be. So I would always start with a CPA. If you're just starting out on with advertising, particularly on social, you can control the daily CPA spend at the ad set level. And if you start really low, you force Facebook, Instagram, so on and so forth to learn and optimize really aggressively. Mm. So that's a bit of a tip. Yeah. And then in terms of on-site metrics, it varies, considerably across industries. So we work with a client that specializes in debt insolvency, and their key metric is leads and direct calls. We've worked with direct-to-consumer e-commerce brands, and theirs is obviously purchases, among other metrics.
She's like, yes.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for affirming me.
Awesome. No, that's very helpful. Thank you. The next question we have here, somebody's asking, what are the benefits of programmatic advertising in 2021? Are there only specific types of businesses that should be really utilizing programmatic advertising to drive their ad campaigns?
Yeah, really great question. I'm so sorry. She's literally right here. Hi. So programmatic advertising is really what's actually most effective by these changes with removing third-party cookies. Programmatic with display specifically, heavily focused on third-party tracking and cross-site tracking. So industry aside, that is going to very dramatically change no matter what, certainly come 2022, but even in 2021. In terms of what businesses, I mean, programmatic is best utilized for, I would say, larger businesses that have a really healthy budget. It certainly adds efficiencies and automations to the process, which is great, both in terms of creative production and campaign deployment. If you're familiar with programmatic, which I suspect this individual is, I would look more into CPD, and that is not the alternative to programmatic, but it focuses more on that first party, building a consumer profile, and then putting your advertising strategies there. So programmatic is great. In summary, generally makes most sense for larger budgets. It's a lot of automations, but it's going to change dramatically because it really heavily focuses on third-party cookies.
Gotcha. And for people who are online that might not be familiar with programmatic, do you mind just quickly giving a blurb to what programmatic advertising actually entails?
Yeah, so programmatic is not a catch-all term, but there are basically different purchasing desks and media buying technologies that automate with display and mostly display, in fact, and it's called programmatic. So basically, it's if you worked with a buying desk that could do this, it would just really heavily focus on these very granular user targeting strategies and automate where your display ads are sent based on that user data. Mm-hmm. And then it could also automate the creative production, especially if you have inventory and website content like that. So it's a far more sophisticated process than going into, let's say, Google Display Network and manually selecting these audiences and keywords and so on and so forth. It's doing it en masse with multiple networks and automating a lot of the process.
Perfect. That's helpful. Thank you. The next question here, you actually touched on it, which is great, but how important is it when developing ads to take into consideration the personalization aspect, i.e. through targeted e-blasts, personalized experiences, content, products, etc.? So I know a big portion of the presentation was now the trending personalization is key. And even writing down, I wrote down the stat, like 44% of consumers are now going to take their business elsewhere if they don't experience personalization, which is huge. So obviously it's very important, but anything you can add there.
I'm so sorry. So when it comes to ad development, typically what we'll do, and we do this for our own advertising as well, we're also in market, is recognize that we're going to have audiences at different phases in their journey. So personalization, in my opinion, more so comes into effect once they've engaged with your website. So once you've driven traffic from ads to your site and they've taken actions. Personalization is best through e-blasts, as this says, or even on-site pop-up content dialogue through chatbots and things like that. When it comes to an ad, I always recommend a healthy mix of more branding awareness type ads. So knowing that there is an audience out there that is qualified, but they're not familiar with your brand. So putting it in front of their eyes, and then having another set of ads that are for that warmer audience group who are familiar. They have expressed intent either through website actions or engaging with your ads at some respect, and warming that up. And then there's still going to be a lot of great retargeting tools that arguably fall into the personalization bucket. Retargeting in a lot of ways is not going away because it is primarily based on first-party data. So if you have services on your site or products on your site or any kind of key information, and you have those events set up through GTM, throwing it back to the top of our conversation, you can then implement smart dynamic retargeting campaigns such that the user is seeing an ad relevant to the product or service they interacted with. You do really want to temper your retargeting campaigns. The obvious example is if someone's purchased a product, don't go showing them that product. And there are, oh man, I could talk about retargeting for a whole presentation, but there are lots of really great ways you can do that and temper frequency so you're not being a nuisance, but really delivering relevant content and not having to manually create these ads.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you. The next question we have, what is the best way to pre-qualify leads on your website? For instance, for real estate, there are lots of browsers just being curious, this person says.
Yeah, like tire kickers, totally get that. So, I mean, the reality is there's no perfect science. I am a big believer. I talked about progressive profiling earlier, but there's also really great progressive forms. And form technology has come a really long way, whether you have a WordPress site or Webflow or Shopify, whatever, where you can start with maybe a relatively short form and then dynamically populate fields based on what a user has selected in the initial. So for instance, if it is, I'll use real estate. If it is, are you a first-time home buyer? Yes, based on that selection, maybe a few more questions pop up. What's your budget? Are you currently represented? Have you talked with the bank? So on and so forth. If it's an investor, you could have its own suite of questions and on and on and on. Progressive forms work really well because it's not this overwhelming experience of seeing a really long form and some of it's not relevant to me, which tends to deter users from actually engaging with it. Creating a really clean form that's progressive and also dynamic based on selection and bearing it in mind with really clean UX, user experience, is the way that the tools that we implement to pre-qualify as much as possible. That said, you're always going to get people who go through that due diligence and they're still not totally qualified. But there are a lot of really cool tools. There's also, there's a huge uptick in chatbot technology where if you have a library, whether it's an FAQ or another resource library, if that can be transitioned to a chatbot, there are a lot of really great ways to mitigate some of those calls that aren't super qualified. So yeah, progressive forms, dynamic fields based on selection and chatbots, I suppose.
Those tips are great. I love that. And the chatbots, so I feel like people are utilizing them more than ever, especially this year with the uptick in e-commerce and online shopping. Oh my gosh. And like the amount of times that even I've had to, like, instead of making return, picking up the phone, having that chatbot online even is so helpful. And you don't have to create those frustrations for people.
Agreed. Yeah, absolutely.
The next question we have here is video marketing really the way to go to level up your digital marketing strategy? Seems like it could be a quick come and go trend. Do people really take the time to watch? What are your thoughts?
Cool question. So come and go trend. I mean, the reality is video ads outperform static ads by a considerable margin consistently across every platform. So that data and performance is indisputable, I suppose. However, that's assuming that the video itself and the content of the video is relevant and makes sense. So it's not uncommon if it is an irrelevant video that you're going to see people, not reaching that 3-second mark or 6-second mark, depending on the length of the video. And then you've got a real problem. The key with video marketing strategy. So one, yes, I strongly believe in video as part of your ad strategy. It does perform really well. But there are kind of best practices. So making sure you have a marketing message and branding early in the video, keeping it short. There's such an urge to want to fit so much in, but the reality is, people are going to scroll by after 30 seconds is even quite long. Mm-hmm. And then the other part of that is if you're going to invest in video production, get a healthy mix of output from that. So if you can consolidate your production and then get, let's say, like a series of 6 video ads that are between 15 and 30 seconds, you can then test and get a sense of length of watching and how it's performing. Video works best for reach and awareness campaigns. That's not to say it's not great for traffic and acquisition, but they're generally reserved for objectives similar to just reaching and filling your funnel with awareness. But it performs well. Will that change? Maybe. I wish I could predict the future, but honestly, I highly doubt it.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Any quick tips on how to best streamline digital marketing so it takes minimal time and effort? It's funny because I think that's a trick question, and even you mentioned earlier, everybody has their capacity and it's easy to, but I mean, if you have any quick tips, feel free.
Yeah. So the reality is that's never a great way to start an answer because it sounds like it's going to be a bummer. The reality is that it's always going to be front loaded. So when we were chatting about setting up those mechanisms to collect data, that is just a process that you should go through, even if it's simply Google Analytics and Google Tag Manager, and then maybe over time you have an email marketing client. That is something that really can't be curbed. You want to do it well. You want to take your time and make sure that it's set up thoughtfully and in response to your marketing and business objectives. However, in terms of streamlining it, the reality is that, I need to stop saying that. The theory is that if you set it up correctly and you take that time at the onset, that then there are a lot of these automations that come into play. So that is where you can really create a lot of ease and take a lot of time back on a go forward basis by taking the time and setting it up. Same with if you do happen to be direct to consumer and have any kind of digital commerce, setting up those triggers and then those responses, a library of responses certainly takes a bit of time. That time is necessary at the onset, but then it's not set it and forget it per se, but there is a lot of that. So that's where you can add a lot of efficiencies to those processes. And then if it's something that you don't have the time for the setup, that's where you might want to engage either a team member that might have the capacity or bandwidth, or you might want to reach out to a marketing professional to get it at least set up and kind of provide a lay of the land.
Awesome. That's really helpful. That was better than I thought it was going to be. Oh. That's awesome. Next question here. If you're just starting up a business, in brackets pre-launch, but wanting to jump into it right out of the gate, what would be the most important thing I should start with when it comes to digital advertising?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when it comes to digital advertising specifically, and you're a new brand, you really want to start with these reach and awareness campaigns. It's basically about starting to expose your brand to qualified audiences. And I don't want to be overly dramatic with the loss of third-party cookies. We're still going to have contextual targeting, keyword targeting, interest targeting. But obviously you're not going to have that first party data as a new business, not right away, but you'll start collecting it relatively quickly. Really, it's about aggressive testing at the beginning. Like I would say, depending on the size of your audience, at least 8 weeks of testing. I would test with social. I mean, Facebook by a landslide owns the majority of social advertising revenue because it works so well. But we test for our new brand clients, we test audiences and we test creative. And well, I don't want to take up too much time, but I'll just, the recipe that we would use. So if you're an ads manager, you would set up one campaign and then it's almost like an org chart. So if campaigns at the top, like the president or what have you, you then have your ad sets. And at the ad set level, you can control different audiences. And then per ad set, you have ads. So if you want to test your audience, you create different audiences in each ad set, and then you show them all the same creative. And then you get a sense of, okay, this is the audience that is responding best. I'm going to allocate my efforts and resources there. And then you flip the script. So you start with the campaign. At the ad set level, you have different creative. Or sorry, at the ad set level, you have the same audience, that best performing audience. And then at the ad level, you have different creative. And then you get a sense of which creative is performing best. And then after this kind of 8 to 12 weeks of testing, you should have a good idea of best performing audiences, best performing creative. You don't want to zero into one. You always want to be A/B testing at least a few different pieces of creative. But certainly when you're starting out, you'll still reap the rewards of some reach and traffic and results. But the ultimate objective is testing, big time, testing. And that's the beauty of digital, is that you get real-time insights.
I recently saw, I don't know if it was in conversation of A/B testing now, like if it's a myth of like A/B testing not being needed anymore. Have you heard of that?
Yes.
Any rumblings?
I mean, yes. However, I am personally such a believer in testing. But you also have to test thoughtfully. So for instance, if a piece of creative or an audience has a really low cost per acquisition, but their CPM is really high, so their cost per thousand reach, you then have to kind of strike a balance of, well, that's not going to scale, because when I start broadening the reach of this really low CPA to a large audience, my cost per thousand reach is going to be really high. So I absolutely believe in testing, especially in the way that I described it. You know, you're really zeroing in on, let's show the same people different ads. Which ones do they like best? Let's show different people the same ads and see which ones respond best. I mean, it's one of those things to me where there's just no wiggle room to really argue the importance of that process.
Yeah, especially if you're just starting out too. Why not? That recipe, like the recipe that you provide an example for, was really clear to understand too. So that was helpful. There's about 2 questions left here. So if we have time for maybe, if we can get through the 2 of them, that would be great. Are there specific ads that you see to be more successful than others?
Sorry, I'm reading both questions to see if I can them. There are ad types that are more successful depending on the objective. So if you are really looking for, I need to reach a new audience in 4 weeks, then social with an awareness objective and really strong creative is going to be better than a search ad. Conversely, if you flip that, if you're really looking like, I need immediate sales in this product category, then search ads, which Google search ads specifically, which are very bottom of funnel, best serve that purpose, because you're only showing your ad to individuals who are either searching for your brand or your product or service. So they are expressing intent, is the terminology we use. Whereas on social, they're not necessarily expressing intent, but they're qualified. So it depends on the objective. 9 times out of 10, we do both, so that we are always kind of having these middle of funnel strategies, warming up leads through social with really great creative, and then ensuring we have search ads, relevant search ads accessible for when an individual is expressing intent and ready to purchase. That also goes back to attribution, which was changing without third-party cookies. And attribution is kind of understanding the user's journey. They saw an ad on Facebook. A couple days later, they went on your site. A few days later, they clicked a search ad, and then they purchased, and it's assigning attribution. So all ads have their purpose, and it just depends on the objective at hand. And then if I could pick only one platform to do all my digital after my spiel, oh my gosh, which one would your favorite be and why? Oh man. I don't know that I have a favorite, because again, they serve such different purposes. You know, they're not, it's apples and oranges. So that's really hard to say.
And then depending, I'm sure, on the client and the business as well.
There's so many variables. I mean, I like I mentioned a few minutes ago, Facebook has the lion's share of ad spend online. Facebook and Instagram, obviously the demos and markets are really different across those two platforms. Maybe Facebook if I had to choose, because you can still do some bottom of funnel remarketing and some really cool dynamic shopping ads there, but that's a tough one. I like them all.
Yeah. Well, sorry, all is your answer. Awesome. Well, that is it for our questions. Thank you so much for all of your questions. They were great. And Jessie, I don't know, you have an answer for everything. And I am so appreciative of that. You're so full of knowledge. And I thank you so much for your time here today. We love having you. I love your presentation so much. I feel like I walk away with just so much that I'm ready to dive into right afterwards. So I love it. Thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, thank you for having me. Thank you for bearing with my dog.
Oh my gosh, anytime. Zoe is always welcome back. I know Brandy was loving it too. So
that just, anywho, thank you. No, that was great.
Awesome. Thanks. And thank you so much for joining us today. Massive thank you to our partner, Larche, for delivering today's session. Registrants who couldn't attend today will definitely be provided a link to the recording afterwards. So keep an eye on your email. Our experts in resident sessions vary from month to month across a variety of different topics. So be sure to go check out sandboxcenter.com on our events page to get in the know. We actually have another EIR coming up next month on July 8th. I don't understand how it's already July is around the corner, which is crazy, but we have Jan Bailey from Ovation Speaker Training on creating intriguing conversations. So make sure you go check it out. We appreciate everybody joining us today. We wish you a safe week ahead and hope to see you soon again. Thanks, everybody.